We'll live in interesting times. Today's stories. The IMF says coronavirus could damage global growth in 2020. In Burundi, over 6,000 distinct human remains found on the banks of the Ruvubu River. Germany and the United Nations want more progress in Libya. Guaido says he will not move an inch despite his uncle's arrest. Americans leave a quarantined Japan ship as virus cases hit 355. Iran foreign minister says President Trump is misled by his advisors. Pompeo promises a collective approach to African troop presence. Plus, for EBC Sports, NBA Cares helps out a Chicago community. This is Eagle News coming to you from Washington, D.C., bringing you stories from around the globe. I am Rose Papa Angeles. The coronavirus epidemic could damage global economic growth this year, the IMF had said Sunday, but a sharp and rapid economic rebound could follow. Georgieva said the full impact of the spreading disease that has already killed more than 1,600 people would depend on how quickly it was contained. In its January update to the World Economic Outlook, the IMF lowered global economic growth forecast in 2020 by a 0.1 percentage point to 3.3%, following a 2.9% growth the previous year, the lowest in a decade. Georgieva said it was too early to assess the full impact of the epidemic, but acknowledged that it had already affected sectors such as tourism and transportation.
It is too early to say because we don't yet quite know what is the nature of this virus. We don't know how quickly China would be able to contain it. We don't know whether it would spread to the rest of the world. What we do know, however, is that yes, indeed, it is going to affect global value chains, already affecting some. It is affecting tourism. It is affecting travel. As a result of the reduction of trade tensions with the Phase 1 agreement signed between US and China, we actually have been predicting some improvement for 2020 in the projections for China. It is true, China today is a much bigger share of the world economy than during SARS. During SARS, 8%. Today, 19%. So if things go bad for China, this is not good news for the rest of the world. But they're working very hard to contain the epidemics. They have poured $115 billion equivalent liquidity so they can perk up the economy.
Georgieva said if the disease is contained rapidly, there can be a sharp drop and a very rapid rebound in what is known as the V-shaped impact. But the IMF chief said the world should be concerned about sluggish growth impacted by uncertainty. She told the Dubai Forum, quote, "We are now stuck with low productivity growth, low economic growth, low interest rates, and low inflation." Burundi's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or TRC, claims to have already unearthed more than 6,000 distinct human remains from multiple ethnic groups on the banks of the Ruvubu River on the border between Gitega and Karuzi provinces. Take a look.
Hariya uvuye ku ntundu uza gusikiraro uvuye ku ntunda kabarabara kaduga gutya kaza mu giheta hari binogi ibiri aho se niyo narindi.
Les victimes étaient majoritairement d'une même ethnie, mais parfois il y en avait d'autres qui périssaient à la suite des conflits interpersonnels ou de règlement de comptes. Au 10e jour de nos travaux, nous en étions au nombre de 6032 victimes excavées.
German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas and the Deputy Special Representative of the UN for Libya, Stephanie Williams, say there are violations to the arms embargo in Libya and call for more negotiations during a press conference at the Munich Security Conference.
Dabei ist allerdings auch ganz offen darüber gesprochen worden, dass es offensichtlich war, dass in den letzten Wochen es nicht unerhebliche und zahlreiche Verstöße gegen das Waffenembargo gegeben hat. Es gibt dann auch Staaten. Und das alles zeigt, dass bei allen Dingen, bei denen wir noch nicht am Ziel sind, der Weg, den wir eingeschlagen haben, funktioniert und das diplomatische Engagement der letzten Wochen wirkt. Letztlich stehen wir jetzt.
A United Nations representative said Sunday the situation in war-torn Libya is deeply troubling, warning that a fragile truce was hanging by a thread as daily life in the North African country worsens. Speaking after talks with Foreign Minister in the German city of Munich, the UN's Deputy Special Representative to Libya, Stephanie Williams, said that over 150 violations have been reported since last month's ceasefire was agreed. She also slammed on the ongoing breaches of a much-abused UN weapons embargo, even after foreign countries agreed in January to stop meddling in a conflict that has dragged in major regional rivals.
The situation on the ground remains deeply troubling. The truce is holding only by a thread, with numerous, over 150 violations reported, and it is the Libyan people that continue to suffer the most.
Libya has been mired in chaos since a 2011 NATO-backed uprising killed longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi, with two rival administrations vying for power. The conflict deepened with military strongman Khalifa Haftar, who controls much of the south and east of Libya, launched an assault to seize Tripoli, the base of the UN-recognized Government of National Accord, GNA, led by Fayez al-Sarraj. States including Russia, France, and the United Arab Emirates and Egypt support Haftar, while the GNA is backed by Turkey and Qatar. World leaders agreed at Berlin summit last month to end all meddling in the conflict and stop the flow of weapons into Libya. But little has changed on the ground since then. At Sunday's follow-up meeting in Munich, foreign ministers from over a dozen countries called the continued embargo violations deplorable. They urged Libya's warring parties, who did not take part in the meeting, to maintain the current truce and step up efforts to negotiate a lasting ceasefire. German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas described a recent first meeting between military representatives from both sides as a good sign, aimed at discussing ways to end the fighting. Maas said the next so-called 5+5 meeting would take place in Geneva on Tuesday. The Libyan rivals are also scheduled to hold their first political dialogue on February 26. Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido says he will not move an inch in his attitude towards the government, despite the detention of his uncle earlier this week. Juan Jose Marquez was detained Tuesday at the international airport near Caracas while accompanying Guaido on his return trip from a 3-week tour to several countries, including the U.S., aimed at the building pressure on President Nicolás Maduro.
Es a la propaganda. Es un ejercicio de propaganda lo que están haciendo hoy la dictadura. El apresto operacional de la Fuerza Armada es muy bajo hoy. Situación. No nos vamos a ver un ápice en nuestra posición. No es un rehén que vamos a transar, porque con los derechos no se... En el DGCIN torturan y matan gente. Ese es el mensaje que me dieron. En el DGCIN mataron a Costa Arévalo. Están los...
The U.S. State Department on Saturday condemned the detention in Venezuela of an uncle of opposition leader Juan Guaido, saying the man was being held on preposterous charges. A statement from State Department spokeswoman Morgan Ortagus said, quote, "The United States strongly condemns the detention of Juan Jose Marquez, uncle of the interim president Juan Guaido, and demands his immediate release." Marquez was detained Tuesday at the international airport near Caracas while accompanying Guaido on his return trip from a 3-week tour to several countries, including the U.S., aimed at building pressure on President Nicolas Maduro. The U.S. is one of more than 50 countries that have recognized Guaido as Venezuelan's interim president after Maduro's 2018 re-election was widely denounced as rigged. The U.S. statement Saturday used uncommonly strong language. It said, quote, "The preposterous charges that have been put forward further exemplify the increasing desperation of Maduro and his corrupt associates." Venezuelan authorities claimed that Marquez had smuggled explosive material aboard a flight from Portugal, despite strong denials by Portuguese authorities that he could have done so. The U.S. statement said, quote, "Manufacturing evidence to justify arbitrary, politically motivated detention is a common tool of the illegitimate former Maduro regime." Accusing Maduro and his associates of mafia-style practices, it said these despicable actions by the former Maduro regime, detaining innocent civilians and inventing false charges, are sadly typical. Guaido was allowed to leave the airport unhindered Tuesday despite being in defiance of a government-imposed travel ban. He has denounced the treatment of his uncle as a kidnapping. The opposition leader said Saturday in Caracas that the detention of his maternal uncle was a cost that he is paying after returning from his international trip. He said, quote, "I got the message and here's the answer. We are moving forward and forcefully so, but we are not moving an inch on our position," adding that Marquez isn't a hostage who we will swap. Guaido had tweeted Wednesday that he holds, quote, "usurper Maduro responsible for what happens to Juan Jose Marquez, an honest and brave man." During his 3-week tour, Guaido met with the British, French, and German leaders and was a guest of President Donald Trump at his State of the Union speech. Up next, Americans leave a quarantined Japan ship as virus cases hit 355. Iran foreign minister says President Trump is misled by his advisors. Pompeo promises a collective approach to African troop presence. Plus, for EBC Sports, NBA Cares helps out a Chicago community. Eagle News will be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Eagle News coming to you from Washington, D.C. Images show the Diamond Princess vessel at port in Yokohama as American tourists prepare to leave the quarantined cruise ship to board chartered flights home as the number of new coronavirus cases diagnosed on the vessel jumped to 355. The Diamond Princess was placed in a 14-day quarantine in early February after a former passenger tested positive for the virus. Americans on board were given the option to leave the ship and fly home, where they will face another 14-day isolation period. The country's health minister said Sunday the number of people infected with the deadly new coronavirus on a quarantined ship off Japan has risen to 355, as the United States, Canada, and Hong Kong prepare to repatriate their residents on board. The figure is a jump of 70 cases from a government tally released Saturday and comes as Katsunobu Kato voiced worries that the rising infection count among the nation's general population could mean the virus spread has entered a new phase. Kato told a roundtable discussion for public broadcaster NHK on conditions aboard the Diamond Princess cruise ship, quote, "So far, we have conducted tests for 1,219 individuals. Of those, 355 people tested positive." The vessel has been in quarantine since February 5 at the port of Yokohama near Tokyo, and Japan's efforts to control the viral infection on board have prompted international concern. The ship was carrying more than 3,700 passengers and crew from more than 50 countries and territories when it docked and was placed in isolation after authorities found a passenger who got off in Hong Kong during the voyage had tested positive for the virus. Japanese officials continued to find new infections among the passengers and crew and rushed them to local hospitals, while others have been told to stay inside their cabins during the 14-day quarantine period set to end Wednesday. The U.S. was preparing Sunday to evacuate some of its citizens, but said those repatriated will go through another 2-week quarantine period at home. According to tweets from passengers, an onboard announcement late Sunday said Americans choosing to leave should get ready. The announcement said asking the group to place their luggage outside their cabin doors. Disembarkation will begin at approximately 9 p.m. According to TV Asahi, Japan's self-defense forces will use about 20 buses to transport the evacuees to Tokyo's Haneda Airport. International efforts to mediate between Tehran and the U.S. are being thwarted by President Donald Trump's advisors, misleading him into thinking the Iranian regime is collapsing, the country's foreign minister said Saturday. France and Japan have both sought to foster dialogue between the two foes in recent months in a bid to calm spiraling tensions, but without success. Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said Trump was being badly advised, and this had led him to reject overtures from French President Emmanuel Macron and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Zarif said at the Munich Security Conference, quote, "Unfortunately, the suggestions by Macron and by Abe and others have all fallen on deaf ears because President Trump has been convinced that we are about to collapse, so he doesn't want to talk to a collapsing regime."
I believe President Trump unfortunately does not have good advisors. He's been waiting for Iranian government's collapse since he withdrew from the nuclear deal. At that time, John Bolton promised him that maximum pressure will bring us to our knees within few months. Now the United States can come back to the negotiating table, but unfortunately, the suggestions by Macron and by Abe and others have all fallen onto deaf ears because President Trump, as I told you, has been convinced that we are about to collapse, so he doesn't want to talk to a collapsing regime.
The nuclear accord that curbed Iran's nuclear program has been slowly crumbling since Trump pulled out in 2018 and reimposed tough sanctions despite European efforts to save it. The U.S. and Iran have also been at loggerheads over the Islamic Republic's ballistic missile program and its interference in regional conflicts around the Middle East. Tensions came to a head in January when the U.S. killed top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in a drone strike in Baghdad, prompting fears of all-out war. Zarif said retaliatory rocket attacks by Iran on U.S. bases in Iraq soon after the Soleimani killing were the end of the military response. But he suggested a possible informal response by hinting at the consequences from the population, likely a veiled reference to Iran's network of proxy militias across the Middle East. Zarif said Trump suffered bad advice from his hawkish former national security advisor John Bolton, the architect of Washington's maximum pressure strategy on Iran. Zarif said, quote, "Now, today, with John Bolton gone, unfortunately somebody else is trying to mimic John Bolton and promised the president that killing Soleimani will bring people to dance in the streets of Tehran and Baghdad." While the Iranian minister did not name those he thought were misleading Trump, he has traded barbs repeatedly with his U.S. counterpart Mike Pompeo. And his mention of dancing in the street was an apparent reference to a tweet by Pompeo following the killing of Soleimani. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Sunday that the United States favored a collective approach with its allies when deciding on troop numbers deployed in Africa against jihadist insurgents.
This is the beginning of my first trip to sub-Saharan Africa as Secretary of State. There was no better place to start than right here in Senegal, a vibrant democracy, rich in culture and history. The United States is proud to count Senegal as one of our closest friends on the continent. We did have a lot of conversation about the security issues here, about America's role in those. We've made it clear the Department of Defense is looking at West Africa to make sure we have our force levels right. We'll get it right. We'll get it right collectively. I'm convinced of that. And I don't have any announcement to make, but I think the people of Senegal should know that collectively, Senegalese forces in the region, European partners, French and United States of America, we have an obligation to get security right here in the region. It's what will permit economic growth, and we're determined to do that.
But Pompeo said the U.S. would work closely with Senegalese and other forces in the region as well as its European partners, especially France. He said, quote, "We have an obligation to get security right here in the region. It's what will permit economic growth, and we're determined to do that." Senegal Foreign Minister Amadou Ba said that the United States had informed his government of its wish to withdraw combat troops.
Aujourd'hui plus que jamais, l'Afrique est confrontée à des défis majeurs liés à l'insécurité et au terrorisme et a besoin des États-Unis d'Amérique qui sont un allié stratégique pour un retour définitif à la paix et à la stabilité. Aujourd'hui, dans ces conflits, il est important que l'Afrique puisse monter en première ligne. Cela nous semble être extrêmement important. Nous avons les hommes qu'il faut. Il nous manque certainement des informations. Il nous manque certainement des équipements.
And now for EBC Sports. Many people know about the NBA All-Star Game, the three-point competition, and the slam dunk contest. What others might not know is that these NBA All-Stars hold events off-court as well. One of these is the NBA Cares event, and this year, NBA Cares went to a community in Chicago reaching out to residents there. Eagle News correspondent Aljamin Santos with the story.
Every year, a city hosts the NBA All-Star, and every year the NBA hosts its community aid through various events through the NBA Cares program. This year, the NBA All-Star is in Chicago, Illinois, and their aim to help the community began at the Greater Chicago Food Depository.
Well, it's the most important event. I mean, when you can give back, you're able to supply food or give your time. That means more than sometimes playing in a game or sometimes competing in a contest. When guys can do stuff like this, you see everybody that's here smiling because it's fun. It's because of it's for a good cause, and it's something that needs to continue to happen. And NBA has done a great job over the years of putting on events like this, and it's even like stuff that we don't even hear about, or the media doesn't even hear about the NBA or other athletes do in their community. So, like I said, everything doesn't have to be public. Everything doesn't have to be in the media, but it's 450 NBA players, and it is 450 big hearts.
Serve their communities and educate as well.
As you know, our young people, our younger players are much fortunate than some of us who played before, and the NBA want to make them understand that as happy as you are playing in this league and having what has come to you, don't forget about the community. There's a lot of community up there who are suffering, and you see that. I think our players' actions speak much volume of what we're talking about here. This is the first time where we see our players are cutting $1 million check. I'll give you just an example. In the city of Atlanta, we have a player like Trey Young, who just gave $1 million check a couple of weeks ago to the community. So these are the example of our DNA. We believe on giving back, and our players are getting it. They're following the best example of the Dikembe Mutombo.
Well, I just got back from India, and I was doing an NBA Care event over there too. And the NBA is a global basketball game, but we do more than just play a basketball game. We go out, we talk to the kids, we do food, we do food banks, we do the children hospital, we create home, we do a lot more than just playing basketball. And it's great that we can teach our youth that this is a great thing to do, is to share and to get back for time.
What kind of message do you want to send out to local?
I send out to my kids. I got my kids here doing it because they need to see what we do, and they need to understanding. Every year I tell my kids, instead of giving clothes away and throwing clothes away, to put it in a bag and taking it, donate to stuff. So we always trying to find a way to help other people out.
Well, I like to involve myself with, I'm very intrigued when I'm visiting little kids and seeing their situations and trying to compare situations with mine and how I grew up and knowing the people that I looked up to and just watching everything that they're doing. So I try to go out and try to be an example and try to doing the right things and just giving back and supporting the ones that support me.
What does it mean to have an NBA Cares program here in Chicago, and what does it do for the community?
It's fantastic for a couple of reasons. First, just let me tell you a little bit about the need here in Chicago. 1 in 8 people in Cook County face food insecurity, 1 in 6 children. The economy's gotten better, but there are a lot of people here in Chicago that are still hurting, especially on the south and west side of the city and on the south and west suburbs. There are neighborhoods with more than 20, 30% poverty and unemployment rates. So there's a lot of people out there that are still in need. And so having the NBA here is fantastic because it helps us raise awareness of the need for this. But it also, there's going to be 500 people here today packing food for families in need. And so it's amazing. And this is actually the largest volunteer repack event in our history, in our 41-year history. And so, so it's great for building awareness, but also all this food is going to go out to food pantries and soup kitchens and shelters and people who need it. So it's really good. We're very grateful. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Obviously, hunger is a year-round problem, right? And so I think people tend to think of it around the holidays. And, it's dangerously cold out there today. And so it is a time to be top of mind, but it's a year-round problem. And so it's great that, all the NBA fans are hopefully seeing players out giving back to their community, and hopefully they're inspired to do the same and help out their neighbors in need.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you.
Extending a helping hand no matter what walk of life has been the experience of everyone involved with the NBA Cares program and the inspiration it created for the community. Once the NBA leaves the city, players and staff hope to have inspired the local community and city officials to continue creating the awareness and provide the manpower required to keep helping one another. From the Greater Chicago Food Depository, Aljamain Santos, Eagle News, always one with 25.
Thanks, Aljamain. That is today's Eagle News. Join us again tomorrow for stories that matter to you. Visit our websites at eaglenews.net and eaglenewslive.com. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/eaglenews and on Facebook at facebook.com/eaglenews. Thank you for watching. I am Rose Papa Angeles, and I am one with 25.